In the summer of 1998, I was asked to conduct a professional investigation into the possible existence of an unclassified primate living in the Everglades and coastal islands of southern Florida.
Please support this channel by subscribing and leaving comments.
In the legend of the Seminole Indians, the Shaawanoki was a real creature, a creature of the deep forest and the swamp.
It's just something like somebody made up just to get on TV and stuff like that.
Head was round shaped, and sort of more like no neck at all, and long gangly arms on them,
We've had, big footprint, mud on our steps. We've had unidentifiable things happen here. The Everglades is a big, mysterious place.
Peter Byrne is a published author, explorer, and professional investigator of unexplained phenomena. He is a Fellow of the Royal Geographical Society of London and a member emeritus of the Explorers Club of New York.
In the summer of 1998, I was asked to conduct a professional investigation into the possible existence of an unclassified primate living in the Everglades and coastal islands of southern Florida, a creature regionally known as the swamp ape. I was given this commission because of what might be regarded as an unusual background in this field, one that has included many years of research into the Bigfoot mystery of the Pacific Northwest and half a dozen expeditions in search of the Yeti, or abominable snowmen, of the Himalayan ranges of the country of Nepal.
And we are rolling.
This sighting took place in 1985, in the fall of that year. And a man was coming back from hunting on this road, which is off Highway 44, high on the Cascades. And he was coming up the road here, and he saw what he says was a Bigfoot cross right at this point here. The legend of the Florida swamp apes, the creatures the Seminole Native Americans call the Shaawanoki, intrigued me to the point where I decided to accept the commission and go to Florida to conduct an investigation. What I discovered there during my research is a fascinating combination of fact and fancy, and included an elder of the Miccosukee tribe, one of Florida's Native American groups, stating emphatically that there is no such thing as the Shaawanoki or swamp ape.
As far as that skunk ape, we don't, we don't believe in that.
And others, including professional guides working in the Everglades, flatly stating the opposite.
Yes, they do. The Indians have a history of this, but they're not going to tell you anything because they don't want anybody running over their lands and grounds.
These contradictory statements were intriguing. The negative statements that discard the possibility of the existence of the creatures could of course have a basis in the psychology of the Native Americans of the South, who do tend to conceal certain aspects of their culture, believing that to reveal it to outsiders is to contribute to its eventual erosion. But if one is to believe them, then where did the name Shaawanoki come from? A name that means man of the swamp, or in this case, possibly ape of the swamp, or swamp ape. My job, my investigation, was to get to the bottom of this mystery and find out where the truth lay. And to do this, I flew to the Sunshine State, eventually landing at a little airfield deep in the heart of what I was told was swamp ape country.
The town of Okeechobee is located on the north shore of Lake Okeechobee. While the most recent swamp ape sightings that were the primary focus of Peter Byrne's investigation have occurred in southern Florida, the areas where the sightings have taken place have mainly been confined to the more isolated country of the Everglades, and this could be explained by the expanding agricultural use and regional development that had forced the creatures to adapt to areas that were in many cases just swampland. Peter Byrne believes that this is likely.
Migrations of men and animals, both voluntary and forced, have been an integral part of the history of North America. As an example, settlement and land cultivation in the Great Plains forced many wild animals, such as wolves, bear, and cougar, out of the grasslands and into the more rugged terrain of the mountains. In the same way, the arrival of Europeans broke down the infrastructure of many of the Native American tribes, driving them out of their ancestral homelands into areas that were foreign to them. Because of this, over the course of time, different states absorbed the shattered remnants of many broken tribes. When this happened in Florida, Native American immigrants with different tribal origins banded together as a matter of survival to eventually become the group known today as the Seminole.
Florida has a unique system of rainfall and drainage, coming from the north, which obtains the heaviest rainfall, and incorporating overflows from Lake Okeechobee. All water flows southward. Due to the lack of elevation in the state, the flow of water down through the grasslands of the Big Cypress Preserve and the Everglades National Park is exceedingly slow. This great, shallow river of water, in some places 50 miles in width, is known as the River of Grass. In southern Florida, the existence of all wildlife is dependent on this vast flow of water from the north. In recent years, the whole ecosystem of the South has been threatened by poorly planned farm irrigation and the ever-growing need for water for the increasing human population of the state. However, hopefully just in time, recent U.S. federal government legislation includes multi-billion-dollar plans to rectify these problems, to give the South back the water that it needs, and to preserve its magnificent ecology for their future.
When I arrived in Florida, I had many questions. Primarily, I needed to know about the wildlife habitat, and the ecology of the Everglades. Behind these questions lay the puzzles of how something like a swamp ape could successfully hide from modern human observation and movement, and also how it could support itself. Using my own experiences in wildlife studies in India and Nepal, I looked firstly at all of the big animals of the South, and their habits and their food needs. The large land animals of southern Florida are the cougar, wild boar, deer, alligator, crocodile, and bear. And as soon as I heard that they were bear, I knew that the question of food for something like a swamp ape was answered. Bears are omnivores and require a great deal of food. And if there is sufficient for a bear, I thought, then there was certainly sufficient for something like a swamp ape. Something that, if it existed, was almost certainly an omnivore. The next question that I had concerned habitat, and it had to do with the size of the actual area in which the swamp apes supposedly lived. A group of the creatures, even a small group, would need a large area both for movement in search of food and also to be able to avoid man. This question was answered by the size of the Everglades themselves, over 1 million acres, and the equally large area of the Big Cypress Preserve that abuts onto them to the north, another 780,000 acres. In addition, I learned the Florida coast is rimmed with 10,000 islands, all but 2 or 3 of them without any human habitation. With answers to these initial questions in hand, the next step was to select a place for a working base, somewhere that would be central to the area that had produced the most sighting reports in recent years and where, as a result, local people would be familiar with the swamp ape legend. For this I chose the little town of Everglades City. As soon as I was established there, I started my inquiries, and one of the first people I talked with was a local store owner. The sale of swamp ape t-shirts in his store clearly indicated a local interest in the phenomenon. How long have you been living in this area, around the Everglades?
In this general area for 15 years.
You know about the skunk ape.
I've heard about the skunk ape, yes.
Just give us your own opinion on what you really think it is.
It could be some old guy around there needing to shave and a bath.
One of the places that had produced sighting reports in recent months was the Turner River region, not far from Everglades City, a rugged area of dense scrub and swamp, and I chose this for my first field trip. I was particularly interested in seeing what the ground sign told me about wildlife and wildlife movement in the woods that bordered the river. While I was there, I met a professional guide, a man who happened to have been with a group of tourists who, some months previously, had actually seen what might have been one of the creatures. Larry Matheny is a retired teacher of biology who works with a local tour company.
It was not a fat animal, it was more of a tall, slim animal. And at first I thought it was a bear, one of our South Florida bears running across the road. Then I realized it was up on its hind feet and did not look like a bear. And I pointed it out to my passengers, and a few of them saw it, 3 or 4 or 5 saw it, and then it disappeared back into the shrubbery.
Out, and I think he saw or heard a car down there, became concerned about it, and went back across the road.
One of the things that impressed me about Florida was the incredible proliferation of wildlife that one encountered everywhere, including hundreds of birds and animals, all of them strands in a wonderful self-sustaining econet, a system so perfectly coordinated that it supported wildlife from birth to death, and after death dealt effectively with the problem of decaying matter by disposing of it in the most natural way. This disposal apparatus, the principal operators of which were the carrion eaters, including crows, ravens, coyotes, buzzards, alligators, and bears, was identical to what I had seen in the tropical forests of Asia, where animals as large as an elephant literally disappear within a few days. And in the case of Florida, I thought that it helped to explain the question of why no swamp ape bodies had ever been found.
Florida, home to over 12 million people. Sunshine and orange juice, white sand beaches, waving palm trees. City skyscrapers, roaring freeways, Cape Canaveral and the Space Shuttle, Key West and the legends of Ernest Hemingway. 1 million visitors a year and a population that is increasing at the rate of 1,000 a month. This is the Florida that most people know and expect to see when they come to visit. But there is another Florida, one that is very different from this popular image. It is the Florida of the great swamps of the Everglades and the sweeping grasslands of the Big Cypress Preserve. The Florida of the 10,000 mosquito-infested islands that ring the southern coast. The wild Florida that is home to 1 million alligators, to bears, cougar, crocodile, and wild boar. Animals that live in dark and silent places, in deep woods where the light seldom penetrates. In hidden retreats they may share with a creature so secretive that it is not listed among the wildlife of the Everglades, has no classification as a species, but, if eyewitness reports are true, has, like the Bigfoot of the Pacific Northwest and the Yeti of the Himalaya, a solid place among the last unsolved mysteries of our planet. This primitive man, or ape, is known by South Florida residents as the swamp ape. But from ancient times, it has been known to the Seminole and the Calusa, the original inhabitants of Florida, the people who preceded the Spanish by 1,000 years, as the Shaawanoki.
I was flying, well, it's over about 2.5 years ago, down about 10 miles south here in the grassland there on the island. It's just an island. And a bear right out in the middle of it. And deer, like some of these high places, deer use these high places, and there's quite a bit of high places. And they'll travel these woods from one place to another.
According to local residents in South Florida, the wildlife population experiences no difficulty in movement or migration, even between the islands that ring the coast. Only man-made obstacles bar the movement of wild animals roaming freely, in this case, for their own protection.
The fencing has been erected to protect wildlife from the dangers of highway traffic, and here it encloses the Trans-Florida Highway 75, also known as Alligator Alley. Many other highways in Florida have similar fencing. In some places, it is specifically designed to protect a particular animal. In this case, the cougar, one of the state's endangered species.
Seminole is a word in our Miccosukee language. Back during the wars, one of my grandfathers, Osceola, they were trying to ship him off to Oklahoma, get him out of the Florida, so they could have the territory. So he's told him that he's a Seminole and he's not going to leave, but this is his land. That's when he stabbed the treaty.
The years 1835 to 1842 witnessed the Second Seminole War. U.S. forces sent to move the Seminole out of their swampland homes were led by a man with a fine reputation in his day, General Andrew Jackson. Jackson was opposed by an equally astute leader, Osceola, chief of the Seminole Nation. The war came to an end with what the U.S. declared was a victory for its forces. But in actual fact, it never truly ended, but merely faced itself out in endless battles with the people of the swamps and in stalemate. About 500 of these valiant Native Americans survived the cannon and muskets of General Jackson's army, eventually retreating deep into the inner swamps, where they successfully hid from thousands of searching troops. Could the swamp apes, the Shaawanoki, have done the same thing? Could they be continuing to do it today?
Florida is a big state with many near, inaccessible, and remote areas. In one place, Okeechobee, roughly halfway between its east and west coasts, I found the smallest post office in the United States. Not far from this little post office, bordering the edge of an area of dense thickets called Hell's Half Acre, is the scene of a puzzling picture taken by a British tourist. The site of this picture is in the aforementioned Turner River Road area. About 9 o'clock one morning, a group of tourists, mostly foreigners, were being bussed down this road to view the alligators that make their habitat in a canal that runs alongside it. Emerging from the tour bus to look around, the group was startled to see a man-like, hair-covered creature cross the road behind them. What the tourists saw appeared real and made some of the members of the group very nervous. One little girl had hysterics and had to be taken out of the area immediately.
And we had an 8-year-old girl there come off the wall. And almost ended the tour because she was so hysterical.
And I pointed it out to my passengers, and a few of them saw it, 3 or 4 or 5 saw it, and then it disappeared back into the shrubbery.
It ran out like as though it was going to cross the road and go into the Turner River swamp. Instead, though, halfway across the road, it stopped, turned around, and loped back in the forest.
Yeah, when I first related the incident, and I was one of the first to see the creature, I was getting no skepticism from the people that I were talking to who had lived here all their life, who began to volunteer stories of their own.
The forest into which the subject of the photo disappeared is composed of dense brush. It is rugged and deserted and interlaced with small rivers. It is without any roads, and it appeared much too hostile to any of the tourist eyewitnesses who might have thought about running after what they saw. But when I entered it, dense though it appeared, I immediately found a number of game trails that ran through it and allowed for reasonably easy movement. At this point, I did not know whether the thing that the tourists and their guide had seen was real, a genuine Shaawanoki or swamp ape, or a man in a gorilla suit. Whatever it was, it would not have had any difficulty penetrating the scrub that borders the road, dense though it is, and using it as an escape route. If it was a Shaawanoki, it probably would have been able to move with ease along any of the game trails. And if it was a man in a gorilla suit, then it most probably would have been a local man with knowledge of the area and experienced in traveling in this kind of terrain on foot. I was very curious about this picture, and of course I was worried about its authenticity. I was not concerned with its source, because it was taken by a British tourist who, if there was a hoax involved, could hardly have been part of it. My concern was whether the creature seen in this picture was a real Shaawanoki or a man in a gorilla suit. This prompted me to subject it to the most careful examination. Then, while I was examining it, another picture arrived from a tourist in Vermont who had been part of the same group on the day of the sighting. The Vermont tourist was able to take 2 photographs of the creature before it disappeared, and this gave me the opportunity, using all 3 pictures, of making a comparative analysis and examination. I started my analysis by enlarging the 3 pictures and projecting them through a computer onto a video monitor. Keeping in mind the description and dimensions that the eyewitnesses had given me for the subject of the picture, that is to say, man-like, about 5'6" to 7 in height, and with a weight of about 150 pounds, I began to study the pictures, and although at first I had high hopes that my findings would support their authenticity, sadly, as the examination proceeded, certain disturbing factors slowly emerged. The first of these was the stride of the picture subject when it trotted across the road. The leg movement, seen frozen in this still, did not look natural. It seemed to have an exaggerated lift to it, as though the subject was bouncing along, almost in a frivolous manner. The second was something very puzzling, and this was the presence of what looked like small pink blotches in the vicinity of the hands. What was the meaning of these? What could they be? The third was the fact that there seemed to be no taper in the subject's leg, as is naturally seen in the human leg and indeed in the legs of nearly all living creatures, the taper that begins in the thigh area and diminishes as it descends towards the ankles. Lastly, I noticed a peculiar horizontal line that was visible in the subject's ankle area. What was it doing there? What did it mean? I looked again at the photographs that had been taken by the two tourists, and I asked myself, was this a real Shaawanoki that they saw and photographed, an extraordinary, unclassified primate as yet unknown to science? Or were they duped, and was the subject of their pictures the proverbial man in the gorilla suit? Part of the answer, I thought, might lie in what a typical gorilla suit looked like, and so to see one, I visited a theatrical rental outlet in the city of Portland, Oregon. This is a typical gorilla suit, or costume, made by a company that supplies them to rental and retail outlets all across the United States. It is made of synthetic hair built on a cloth frame. The face, hands, and feet are made of plastic, and the people who showed me the suit told me that pink coloration was normal for the palms of the hands and standard to the costume. Was this the pink blotching that I had seen in the photograph? They also explained to me that because of the difficulty of providing form-fitting suits for so many different renters, that the suit bodies were usually made to be quite baggy, and this included the legs, which, as can be seen here, have no taper to them at all. They also explained to me that suits never came in a single piece, but always in an upper suit that the wearer climbs into, with gloves for the hands and booties for the feet as separate pieces. This means that the upper suit terminates in these areas. In the case of the trouser leg, this termination takes place at the actual end or cuff of the trouser leg, and this square cut very probably accounts for the strange line that I had seen in the photographs. My conclusion then, in regard to the subject of these three pictures, is that what is depicted in them is not a Shaawanoki, but almost certainly a man in a so-called gorilla suit. Now, Sean, you're a guide, and you've been guiding here for a number of years. You're an experienced guide, and also you grew up in this area. You told me you used to kayak, canoe in this area. So what do you really think about the reality of the skunk ape? Do you think something like that could exist here?
I've been in pretty deep. I've been in 30 miles, and I have a pretty good feel for what's in the Everglades. And my personal opinion is the same opinion of a lot of the local people, that there is no validity to it, that it's just a story made up for the media.
One of the questions that occupied my mind in regard to the living and survival habits of the Shaawanoki concerned the surface composition of the Everglades, much of which is pure swamp, underwater, and in turn underlaid with deep mud. And how any animal other than a fish could live in this environment and move through it. I came across the first of the thousands of small tree-covered islands that are called hammocks. And I suddenly realized that whereas it would be next to impossible for anything other than an alligator or a fish to survive in this kind of terrain, the hammocks, of which there are untold thousands, offered dryland habitation as well as dense cover, the perfect habitat for a shy creature like a cougar or a deer or the Shaawanoki.
It's like a razor knife.
Oh, yes.
You have to walk through it. You wouldn't be able to do it.
Yeah.
You could go about 10 feet and that's it. A piece of sawgrass, you can take your hand and run up it, but you can't go down it. It'll really cut you. You'd be better off to walk on the edge, or even to get in the water would be a lot easier then.
At least you'd have to have long sleeves on and long pants. Again, travel between the hammocks in the swamps would be difficult but not impossible for a man. But the mud is generally not deep, and my guess is that animals like bear and cougar move between these little islands with comparative ease. If there is an unclassified primate living in the swamplands and forests of southern Florida, where could it have come from and when? To try to answer this question, we must look at the evolution of the Native American on this continent and the lands from whence they came. As of now, it is generally believed that their geographical place of origin lies in Eastern Asia, and that they came from there to this country as hunters, following the game on which they depended for food. Arriving at the eastern end of the Asian continent, they crossed the Bering Straits via the land bridge that existed at that time, and from there spread out across the vast, empty continent of North America. Some of them came as far south and east as present-day Florida, arriving there long before the first European arrivals, the Spaniards, set eyes on the continent. There, living under extremely primitive conditions, in the heat and mud of the mosquito-infested swamps, they made their homes and flourished. Is it possible that something equally primitive, a primate that was half man and half ape, came with them, and like them, found suitable habitat in which to survive in the same area? Is this probable? If so, what evidence, in addition to the claims of eyewitnesses, exists to support the hypothesis? One small contributing piece of evidence, unearthed during my investigation, is a sighting claim by two people that took place in July 1997. The incident occurred at a place called Burns Road, not far from the Ochoppe post office. Like the Turner River Road incident, this sighting is also supported by photographic evidence. But in this case, the incident has a different ring of credibility to it, not the least part of which is the integrity and reputation of the eyewitnesses involved. One is a retired fire chief, Vince Dorr, a man with many years of praiseworthy service in the area in question. The other, Mrs. Jan Brock, is a real estate lady, well known and well regarded locally. And whereas the Turner River Road sightings may well be the result of a fabrication, this incident may, just possibly, depict a real Shaawanoki.
I forget the exact date. It was the same date that Vince had seen it. And I don't know who went first out the road, but I think it was about 7:45 in the morning.
Vince Dorr is a retired Florida fire chief, and after 25 years of dedicated service is well respected by the people of his community. One morning in July 1997, he was driving down Burns Road on his way to work.
You put a suit on and run around here in hot, humid, in a suit, number one. I mean, that hit my mind real quick, and I thought, somebody playing games. And then I thought, if it ain't a bear, and it sure wasn't a man, I just thought, you know, it had to be somebody maybe playing games. And if it wasn't, then what? I didn't. So I shot one shot. Now, I had a new Kodak film in there, 24 exposures. I got to this point, I stopped, got out, and looked, got the camera out, turned it on, and then I yelled. And by then, he was maybe 500 feet.
When you yelled?
And then he stopped. I snapped the picture.
Yeah.
Then he started going this way.
He went back parallel to the highway. That's strange.
I mean, I could have run after him with a gun.
by finding the precise place where the subject of Fire Chief Dawes' picture walked and then stopped, and by standing in the exact same place for comparison, I was able to gauge its height and approximate weight. I stand 6 feet, and the picture subject was just a little shorter, possibly 5 foot 9 or 10, and I would estimate its weight to be about 150 pounds. The build of the photo subject was manlike, and the general description of it, given to me by both the fire chief and Mrs. Jan Brock, is similar to that given for the Turner River Road creature. But there the similarity ends. For whereas the Turner River Road creature disappeared very quickly into the brush, the Burns Road creature, when encountered by the fire chief, and when it heard his shout, did something entirely different. It stopped.
And it turned. It startled it and it turned. And it's then I snapped the shot.
Not only did it stop, it actually stood for a moment and then turned around and looked back at the fire chief, something that, in the light of one particular local custom, would, it seems to me, be very odd behavior for a man in a gorilla suit. Because the Burns Road area lies in the heart of the remote country of rural South Florida, a place that, like many rural areas of the U.S., is what is known as gun country, a place where it is customary for even the most responsible of people to carry weapons as a matter of routine. Anyone who lives there is aware of this, and indeed looks upon it as an accepted way of life. And a man who puts on a gorilla suit to perpetrate a hoax and walks out on a country road early in the morning also knows it, to where, if he is challenged, knowing that he must appear to the onlooker as something very strange and very exotic, even possibly as a valuable trophy, he is not going to stand around and chance getting shot. And yet, this is what the subject of the fire chief's picture did. It stood, it looked back at the man taking a picture of it, and then it walked. It did not run, it walked slowly away. And this, in my opinion, is not the action of a hoaxer. In other words, it lends reasonable credibility to the subject of the picture in question, and to the possibility of its being real.
The U.S. Parks Department that operates the Everglades National Park states emphatically that there is no such thing as a swamp ape living in the Everglades or forests of South Florida.
Naturally, with this attitude firmly fixed in their minds, they have done no research into the phenomenon, and state that, until someone finds one, and thereby proves that they exist, they do not intend to start.
Some Native Americans of the area, like Heneheo Osceola, support the Park Service's attitude and state that not only do they not exist, they never did.
No.
But if this is the case, then how is it that there is a name in the Seminole language for the creatures, and that those Native Americans who will talk about them know them as the Shaawanoki?
When we were young, our parents used to say to us, "Never go into the forest alone. If you do, the Shaawanoki will get you."
My personal
There are
opinion
the
is the same
skeptics.
opinion of a lot of the local people that there is no validity to it.
Again?
And then there are the eyewitnesses, some of whom are 4th and 5th generation Floridians, respected and well-regarded members of their own communities.
It ran out like as though it was going to cross the road.
I know he's there because I've seen him.
It was in an upright position, kind of lumbering across the road.
I happened to notice a distance down the road there was a black object.
It seemed to me that the creature was about 7 foot tall.
I'm no specialist, bear specialist, but it was not a bear.
Other locals, who do not claim to have seen a Shaawanoki, echo the sentiments of Clyde Butcher, a renowned nature photographer who has spent hundreds of hours pursuing his exacting profession in the most remote corners of the Everglades.
The Everglades is a big, mysterious place. You know, it's also got all kinds of food. I mean, anybody could survive here. I mean, there's so much food here. There's vegetables, there's obviously meat and fish and all kinds of fruits, roots.
And there you have the enigma, the mystery of the Everglades. Do the Shaawanoki really exist? Is there, unknown to science and still waiting to be discovered, an incredible unclassified primate living in the swamplands and coastal islands of Florida?
The realm of science is by its very nature conservative, yet we're always open for new discoveries. Just recently, in Southeast Asia, it was determined that Gigantopithecus, a large extinct ape, was living contemporaneously with Homo erectus, one of our human ancestors, less than 500,000 years ago. The swamps of South Florida have a huge biomass. It's a large, well, not unexplored area not well known. The panther has been living there timidly with humans, rarely seen. The possibility that another large animal living in a similar manner exists is a possibility that we cannot dismiss.
In the light of the comparatively recent discovery of the mountain gorilla in 1904 and the discoveries within the last decade of half a dozen new species, it seems appropriate that science should begin to take a more open-minded look at the possibility of still more discoveries to be made, especially in the field of large mammals.
As regards the two other great mysteries that have as their focus large primates, the Yeti, or abominable snowman of the Himalaya, and the Bigfoot or Sasquatch of the Pacific Northwest of the USA, I have a very open mind. This as a result of more than 30 years of full-time, well-funded research and investigation of both phenomena. In the matter of the Shaawanoki, however, my studies have been very limited and, in essence, include only the research necessary for this investigative report. As an investigator of this kind of unusual phenomena, I believe in applying a hard, critical approach. Hard evidence, in the case of the phenomena involved, means physical evidence, and to date, with the Yeti, the Bigfoot, and the Shaawanoki, there has been none. With all three, reports have been made of findings of hair and feces and bones. But all of these reports, when subjected to the cold eye of the careful investigator, have turned out to be insubstantial. Footprints, sounds, eyewitness reports all lend credibility to the existence of something, but scientific proof as a basis for positive classification demands physical evidence, and this applies to the Shaawanoki just as it does to the Yeti and the Bigfoot. Do the Shaawanoki of South Florida really exist? Concluding this brief investigative report, I would like to be able to say that I think that they do, or with equal conclusiveness that they do not. However, until I have time to conduct more research or see some hard evidence, I have to say that as of now, it's anyone's guess, and that your guess is as good as mine.
The mystery of the Shaawanoki, like the great mysteries of the Yeti and the Bigfoot, will not prevail indefinitely. We live in an age of ever-accelerating technological discovery, to the point where, in the not-too-distant future, there will obviously be devices that can be used to bring these mysteries, if they truly contain hard physical evidence in form of real living creatures, to a successful conclusion. Right now, we have the ability to find new planets at distances almost beyond the imagination of man, to see into the depth of the ocean, and to photograph the tiniest of objects on our planet from hundreds of miles in space. And these are just what we common members of the public know about. At this time, we can only suspect what even more sophisticated machines may be in use by the covert agencies that operate in secret behind the classified political barriers of our society. In time, of course, we will have access to this technology, and when we do, we will be able to apply it to the solutions of these great mysteries. When that time comes, we will learn the truth about the Shaawanoki, and men like Peter Byrne and his contemporaries, their years of investigative toil behind them, will be able to sit back and say, yes, it was indeed worthwhile. It was a challenge worth accepting. It was time well spent. Until then, the mystery remains with us.
If you're enjoying all this rare and unique content, please show your support by subscribing and leaving comments.